can't talk too long. I gotta poo.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
It's like looking in a mirror, only not.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of Effin' Birds Presents Travolta Cage, a podcast about the two greatest actors, nay, thespians, in movie history. I am Clint Worthington. I am a senior staff writer at Consequence, and I am also the founder and editor-in-chief of The Spool.
And I tragically remain Nathan Rabin, the proprietor and namesake of Nathan Rabin's Happy Place and the author of many, many books, most recently, The Joy of Trash, which just came out, and The Weird Accordion to Al, colored in special edition, which I'm very proud that I pronounced both of my books correctly. It's hard to do so.
You know what? It's 2022. It's time for a fresh new start. I hope you all had a safe and happy holidays and New Year's audience. For those
COVID is over.
Yes, exactly. COVID's over. God bless us, everyone. We're a podcast that is going through the filmographies of one Sir John Travolta and one Sir Nicolas Cage, and seeing where their careers intersect, where they're at particular times in their careers. And boy, howdy, we are in the late 2000s. With both of our folks.
Mid to late 2000.
2007, 2008, for a decidedly interesting double feature.
Another weird commonalities. I feel like that's one of the things that's awesome about this podcast, beyond its incredible popularity and being incredibly lucrative, is that there are all these weird coincidences. And this is definitely one of those weird coincidences kind of pairings.
Exactly. And seeing like the weird sort of talent bleed over between each artist in like relatively close proximity, which is, I find, very interesting.
Gotta work with Lido.
Yeah. So last episode, we talked about Wild Hogs, I believe, or was one or two episodes ago, we talked about Wild Hogs, a movie in which Travolta was a leather jacket clad motorcycle enthusiast who at one point interfaces with Peter Fonda. So now we have 2007's Ghost Rider, in which Nicolas Cage plays a leather-clad but motorcycle enthusiast who interfaces with Peter Fonda. Except this time, instead of Peter Fonda just being Peter Fonda from Easy Rider, he's literally Satan. And we're going to pair that with something similarly gritty and edgy and hard-hitting. The Disney Animation Studios crowd pleaser Bolt, starring John Travolta as the voice of the titular canine character. But before, and we're also going guestless this week because it's New Year's. It's tough for everybody. It's tough for everybody to get those sort of things scheduled. So you just got us. You're riding shotgun with us in the little sidecar of our motorcycle, covered in skulls and chains.
You're sniffing our cologne, and we're not being weird and homophobic about it.
Indeed, we are passing the jelly bean martinis on to you. But before we start that in earnest, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/TravoltaCage. Please give us some buckage. It really helps us out. 'Tis the season of giving still. It's New Year's.
It still qualifies as a Christmas present for Clint and a Hanukkah present for me.
Indeed. And who knows, maybe a tax write-off too. Depends on how creative you are. Yeah, exactly. So let's start with Ghost Rider, shall we? Now, Nathan, would you like to regale us with the tale of the Ghost Rider?
Sure,
do it in your best Sam Elliott voice, if you could.
Well, there are two different kinds of voices that would be appropriate for discussing the motion picture Ghost Rider. One of which is a Sam Elliott voice, where you just get really, really deep down low, sort of like Bradley Cooper in A Star Is Born. Yeah. Alternately, you can do the voice of the star, which is Nicolas Cage, who portrays Johnny Blaze as Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, my ex-wife's father, weirdly enough. So Ghost Rider is a spectacularly disappointing 2007 superhero motion picture, and with Nicolas Cage, the most awesome dude ever, plays Johnny Blaze / Ghost Rider, who theoretically, on paper at least, is the most awesome, kick-ass, badass superhero ever. I mean, he's literally Evel Knievel if Evel Knievel was a bounty hunter for the devil
Yes.
who had a flaming skull.
He's
So
anti-hero Knievel.
Oh, he's anti-hero Knievel. I mean, if you, the more you know about Evel Knievel, he was an anti-hero / villain in his own right. He was a very, very sleazy, very disgusting human being.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm like, oh my God, that sounds like the most awesome character ever. It was the 1970s when we had Evel Knievel mania, and then all of the comics book writers were on drugs.
Yeah.
And things got a lot more interesting, especially with Marvel and kind of their cosmic age, and they got pretty crazy and pretty out there. So you would imagine that Nicolas Cage playing Ghost Rider would be unbelievably awesome. It would be, a can't miss proposition that misses by a great deal.
Yeah.
This is a motion picture by Mark Steven Johnson, who you know as the screenwriter of the Grumpy Old Men franchise. He also wrote Jack Frost. He also wrote, more pertinent to this podcast and this movie, Daredevil.
Yes.
And he wrote and directed Daredevil. And I remember Daredevil as being one of the most despised motion pictures in the history of the universe. One of the things that I did is I went and I looked it up when I was writing my article for this, which is already on my website, Nathan Raven's Happy Place. And I was shocked to discover that it had about a 43% Rotten Tomatoes rating. And there was one critic who said that it was the best superhero movie ever made and had an intellectual and emotional heft of an Oscar movie. And again, it was not sarcastic. They were not taking the piss out of everybody. Somebody who paid money to express their opinion thought that Daredevil was the greatest superhero movie ever
I remember
made.
feeling that spiritual weight when Jennifer Garner was poking holes in the actor's hand while Evanescence played.
Well, and there's a blog post in this, but I think part of it is just that this was from an earlier era of superhero movies where our expectations were a lot lower and our standards were a lot lower. And if it was okay, then that was like, we gave it a big thumbs up because what? You're going to make some sort of super artful superhero movie that's going to get nominated for Best Picture or something? No, superheroes are dumb for babies, which is pretty much the overwhelming idea and the aesthetic behind Ghost Rider. So this begins with 15 minutes of some schmuck who is not Nicolas Cage playing Johnny Blaze as a 17-year-old. And he's just a friggin' schmuck. And the devil comes to him. And the devil says, hey, your dad is going to die. But if you sell your soul to me, then he won't die in the exact way that I just specified.
Yeah,
and
real
Johnny
monkey's
Blaze,
paw situation.
Oh, very much. And Jerry Blaze being very, very stupid. Didn't realize that literally every deal with the devil went south. Like, there's nobody who's like, I made a deal with the devil and it turned out well. I got the best of it and I'm living my best life. It's like, no, he's going to find a way to screw you over no matter what. So, fair enough. The next day, a guy who's, I just thought of it as Chris Noper. Because he looks just like Chris Cooper, but he's kind of a nobody, and he doesn't have any kind of presence or charisma or anything going for him. As
that guy, by the way, is Brett Cullen, who is a character actor who's been good in other stuff, but he's also played other superhero dads. He plays Thomas Wayne in Joker.
Oh my God, wow, those are two terrible performances in staggeringly disappointing superhero movies. So he's like, oh no, so he grows up to be Nicolas Cage with really weird hair, and he's Evel Knievel, and he's also Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
And Nicolas Cage makes a lot of very fun choices for this motion picture, one of which is that he does not drink alcohol, he eats jelly beans.
Yeah.
Just like the people in the movie The Ant Bully, he just can't get enough of those delicious jelly bellies, which he drinks from a cocktail glass. And then his other big eccentricity is he's a huge Carpenter superfan.
Yes.
So he's a very macho guy who loves the soft rock sounds of the Carpenters. And then, as I said lastly, he is Elvis Presley. Yes. And when I say that he's Elvis Presley, I don't mean like, oh, there's a bit of an Elvis inflection. I don't mean like, oh, he's one of the influences in this. I mean, he's literally playing Johnny Blaze as Elvis Presley. And it's very, very fun and a very goofy, a very silly, a very inspired choice. All of the other choices that this motion picture make are terrible, with the exception of Sam Elliott is the narrator and he's the caretaker. And
Carter Slade.
when Johnny Blaze becomes Ghost Rider, he kind of shows him the ropes and tells him what's going on and this and that. And there's a point later on where he reveals that he is the original Ghost Rider, and I'm like a cowboy Ghost Rider. And you're like, oh my God, that's going to be so cool. Sam Elliott as a cowboy Ghost Rider and Nicolas Cage as the regular Ghost Rider. Like, this is going to be so awesome. Like, this movie, which has kind of sucked up till now, will suddenly get awesome. And so he's like, yeah, so I'm the cowboy Ghost Rider. Now I'm leaving forever. Yeah. I'm exiting the motion picture. This sounds cool, so we have to cut it out.
Get one VFX demo shot of us riding together. And then
Oh my God. So there's there. And then Donald Logue plays, I guess, one of kind of the roadies for Johnny Blaze. And that's kind of fun. Yeah. And then Eva Mendes plays Johnny Blaze's love interest. Like the love of his life. And this is one of many occasions where you see a motion picture where characters are supposed to be the exact same age. And they're anywhere between 10 to 25 years apart. Two that kind of stand out in my mind, one of which was Mank.
Yes.
Mank was supposed to be the exact same Gary Oldman's character was supposed to be the same age as who's the actress? I'm totally blanking.
Oh, Amanda Seyfried.
Amanda Seyfried, yeah. And in reality, he's 25 years older. Also,
he's an alcoholic, Nathan.
Right. And he did take terrible care of himself, and he did look like total garbage.
And maybe Jelly Beans, a life of Jelly Beans ages you.
That's true. And then the other is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, where Robert Downey Jr. and Michelle Monaghan are supposed to be the same age, and Robert Downey Jr., despite leading a very, very clean life, famously leading a very clean life, is 15 years older.
Yeah.
And in that case, at least it's like, oh, they've got wonderful chemistry. They're both really fun performances. Like, I can overlook the fact that you're clearly trying to put these characters who are much older than one another as the same age. With Eva Mendes, there is nothing there. Yeah. And as we've seen, one of the Nicolas Cage's great strengths as an actor is he has great romantic comedy. He has romantic chemistry with his female leads. Like, one part of what makes City of Angels so much better than it has any right to be is he really sells the idea of, I'm so in love with Meg Ryan that I'm literally willing to give up heaven for it.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, there's nothing beyond, like, she was cast in the lead and she's very attractive. Like, there's nothing.
Oh, yeah. And the costuming bears that out too. Like, even in the most casual sort of like everyday clothes, like her shirts are very low cut and like the cleavage is very, very clear. It's sort of like they're making any and all attempts to super sexualize Eva Mendes. And I get it, but it's also weird to like I'm looking at the poster for Ghost Rider right now, and they share billing. They're both of their names on top of the poster.
And I guess this was like after the Hitch. This was right after Hitch. It was kind of her breakthrough. But again, this is one of those like there's no role here.
There's nothing for her to do. I love Eva Mendes, but there's nothing for her to do here. She is girl. Like, yeah.
Oh, totally. And so part of the problem with this, and we had this with Ant Bully, where Ant Bully came out at a time in which computer animation kind of sucked, and you couldn't depict human beings in a way that wasn't kind of nightmarish if you weren't Pixar and if you weren't Disney, unless you had like the greatest animators in the world. And with this, you have CGI at a place where it's not good enough to be convincing or interesting, but it's not cheesy enough to be fun.
Right.
So you kind of have this sort of middle ground. And I think part of it also, and I sort of said this in my article, when they were doing the CGI tests and the first CGI test came back, like, this is what Ghost Rider will look like.
Yeah.
And he will be a flaming cartoon man who looks like a black velvet poster that you would win in a Midway in 1976 and be like, okay, this looks terrible. Like, this looks like garbage. And also they put Nicolas Cage's voice through so many filters that it's unrecognizable.
I was convinced it was a different voice actor. Like, I did.
Oh, well, I looked on Wikipedia because I'm like, oh, like, it totally doesn't, like, there's a total disconnect between Nicolas Cage as Johnny Blaze, which is fun and cool and fun of these, awesome choices, and then Ghost Rider, who is a bunch of ones and zeros that looks ridiculous and has like this nightmarish heavy metal voice, cheesy blah blah.
And
blah,
the
blah,
proportions
blah, blah, blah.
are off too. Where like because it's obviously it's a human actor with like a flaming CG skull on top. Like the skull looks smaller. He looks like the Goombas from like the Mario Brothers movie.
Yeah, well, I kept thinking, like, what would make this cool? And I think what would make this cool would be if it was practical effects.
Yeah.
You know, that if there genuinely was, like, a really cool skull mask and
Yeah.
you found a way to, like, and again, I'm really thinking, like, God, if you had, like, Walter Hill directing this in, like, 1984, or, like, John Woo, or Catherine Bigelow. Like, you have all of these badass filmmakers who have this real take on their material. And instead of these people, you got a total nobody, a total hack, somebody with no vision beyond let's make this like the comic book, but boring and bland. Let's hit all the beats with no passion, with no inspiration, with nothing going for it.
Because it's got to hit the PG-13, so there's no edge to
Right.
Ghost Rider. Well, it doesn't help that because we haven't even talked about the villains. Because who does Ghost Rider fight in this? A bunch of mall goths.
Well, we're talking about the plastic bag kid from American Beauty.
Yes.
And I love that there was a period where superhero movies were in such low regard that you could be like, who should we get for the bad guy for Nicolas Cage's Ghost Rider? Let's get the plastic bag kid from American Beauty. He needs money for drugs.
Yeah. He plays Blackheart, Satan's fail son, adult fail son.
His Donald Trump Jr. of the Satan family.
Yeah, his large adult son who wants to retrieve this contract that Sam Elliott's Ghost Rider hid away because I guess he decided, oh, well, this contract will allow hell to reign on Earth or something. And so it's the MacGuffin and everyone, like, it doesn't matter because it's Wes Bentley flanked by 4 mall goths in ankle length trench coats, like that are alligator skin with dreads. And I felt like I was watching Underworld. For a hot second. Like, it's all just so uninspiring, and like some of them have like wind powers, some have like water powers, but it all, like you said, the CG is so rough that like the water, like at one point Ghost Rider steps in a puddle that turns out to be one of the villains, and it's just like this weird goo with like the number of times they try to convince you that these people are scary by like superimposing fangs or like creepy demon faces on
They're
them.
from hell. They're in league with the devil.
Yes, I was so wild, and the fact that it kept going, well, because there are 4 now, obviously the 4 horsemen comparison, but also like it's there so that each one can die in a new action sequence in each act. And like it's so dumb and uninspiring, and like all the Ghost Rider powers don't really work. And I love the one sort of comic book affectation that I enjoyed is Johnny Blaze's tendency to his pointing style is very interesting, even before he becomes Ghost Rider. Because Ghost Rider has a thing called the penance stare, where he's like points at someone and says innocent or guilty, and you look into the eye sockets of Ghost Rider's skull, and you see all your sins reflected back to you, and it like calcifies your own eyes, and it burns your soul away, and so I get that when it's like in the dramatic superhero pose there, but like they try to foreshadow it by pre-Ghost Ridering. He like loves to just like point full,
look over there,
full arm extended down, like
somebody left a beer bottle on the couch over there.
Right.
but that also, like, again, I think that's Elvis. Like, that is Elvis body language. Those are Elvis facial expressions, and again, that's a fun choice, not an unusual choice.
Yeah.
He did that in Wild at Heart. And as kind of said in my piece there, it's kind of in Wild at Heart, he was Elvis a 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, he was 10 the entire film. And here I feel it's like 7 to 9, where sometimes he's super, super, super Elvis, and sometimes he's a little less Elvis, but he's always Elvis. And it's the only fun, weird, interesting choice in a movie that, again, just kind of goes straight down the middle in a way that's, and again, the part of it that's bland is more offensive to me than the part that's boring.
Yeah.
Because at least bad has personality, at least bad has vulgarity. Bland is just going through the motions. Bland is just like, oh, this is a Mark Steven Johnson motion picture, and that means somebody's asleep at the wheel, and nobody really knows what they're doing, nor do they care what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is the kind of era of filmmaking that the Venom movies kind of harken back to. That sort of pre-MCU Marvel joint. I mean, this is very we talked about Daredevil, of course, but there's also like parallels to Blade, because this is operating in a very similar universe. I mean, obviously the same sort of Marvel stuff, but it's also that subgenre
some
of
kind of
anti-heroes. Yeah, anti-heroes in black leather. That
talking Marvel Dark.
Donal Logue's in it, it's the whole Donal Logue subgenre of Marvel movies. But my advice for you, if you were to ever watch Ghost Rider, which I think we had to rent it, which God help you, just fast forward until you see scenes of Nick Cage looking in a mirror. Because those are the most fun scenes, because like you said, when the script gets out of his way and Nick Cage just wants to, because Nick Cage is a huge fan of the character, and I think that's why he did it, and that's why he like pours so much of himself in this. And it is a weird performance within, like, he gets outside the tight box of the script at just enough times to make this not a complete disaster. But like there's the moment where he's like his shirtless scene, right, where he's all oiled up and finally abbed up, and he starts to try to like spook himself into Ghost Rider again. That stuff's fun, but like then you fall asleep again right after that happens.
Well, I remember on IMDb they had some really, really mean bits of trivia, one of which was that fans thought that that his abs were CGI. And if they were, they would have looked really terrible and unconvincing and had no personality. The other of which was that it took 3 hours to get Nicolas Cage's hairpiece perfect.
Yeah.
For every scene. And kind of looking back at the still, that's one of those things where you look at the still is like, oh, you get the Elvis, you get how misguided, you get how cheesy everything is, and you get how utterly ridiculous the hair is. Because he was going bald at this point, as was John Travolta, and the more they tried to hide it, the more ridiculous it looked, and the more you obsess about the fact that they're two middle-aged men with male pattern baldness who are not going bald gracefully, although it took Travolta eventually did it, but it took him decades upon decades of ridiculous hair pieces like the ones that you see. I also feel like this was a very expensive hairpiece.
Yeah.
Like they're like, here's, it's $75,000 so you can look like a 26-year-old.
It looked like it was dipped in fountain pen ink and like slapped on his head. It's like real. It's real pitch black.
Well, and I feel like this is part of what's kind of weird and interesting about them at this stage is they're aging out of being action stars.
Yeah.
Or at least they're aging out of being major studio action stars. They're still, if you want to go to East Romania and film a movie with Chad Michael Murray, you certainly can be an action star. Right. But if you want to headline a $125 million Jerry Bruckheimer movie, like, you gotta keep making hits. And this is around the time that they stopped making hits. Although, Wild Hogs was a hit, Bolt was a hit. This did well enough to inspire a sequel. So again, they were being successful, but the movies weren't great.
Yeah, exactly.
And before, the movies were great, but they weren't terribly successful financially. Like Weatherman, it was not killing it at the box office.
No, exactly. And this is, again, like, this is a really crappy superhero movie made worse by the fact that it's an hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
When this is like, definitely they could have shaved like 10 to 20 minutes off this. But there are specific scenes, like I said, that are really nice. There's a scene in which Johnny Blaze is arrested. And he goes to jail and is in a cell with a bunch of dangerous criminals in which he Ghost Riders out. That reminded me blessedly of the motion picture Malignant. Have you seen that one yet?
I have not, no.
Oh, there is I highly recommend it, because there is a scene in a jail cell where some supernatural shit goes down in the middle of the jail cell that reminded me of this very, very much. And so like those bits worked. I had a perverse delight in seeing Rebel Wilson in an early cameo. Like she has, I'm like, oh, I see it. Like there is a star here because she's just doing her thing in this small cameo. I'm like, oh, okay. I see why she's in here. But
it's like Maria Bamford in Lucky Numbers, where I was like, that kid's got something.
I know.
Zazz, moxie, charisma.
Can't wait for Pitch Perfect to come out and show us what we've got. Yeah.
And I like Peter Fonda. He's a weird dude. I actually have an autographed things from there. But I feel like he could be really good when he's restrained.
Yeah.
And then sort of his act is underacting. And I feel like in both Wild Hogs and Ghost Rider, he just showed up and did his cheesy Peter Fonda shtick. I mean, this is, Woolie's Gold. But again, it's just so lazy. And even the casting of him and Sam Elliott is just like, well, who are the dudes you would expect from this? And yeah, I was disappointed on Sam Elliott's behalf. I would have loved to have seen, a cowboy Ghost Rider. I would like to have known more. But again, I just felt like this is a movie where everything Nicolas Cage brings to it is fun and inspired, and he's enjoying himself, and there's a sense of life, and everything other than, again, these fun supporting performances, it just feels so generic and bland and kind of daredevil-y. And I hate to say this, but I don't think that Mark Steven Johnson he's no Zack Snyder. He doesn't understand the power understand and elevate and refine the superhero movie to the level of art.
Indeed. Yeah. And I mean, even right down to the editing style, it's a very aughts blockbuster thing where a lot of big flashy edits, a lot of like frenetic heavy metal video, like flashes of white, and like it's all very like edgy, and but then you get things like Nick Cage drinking from a coffee pot and saying Italian, and I'm like, okay, I mean, give me this. There is a reason I have yet to see Spirit of Vengeance, but I'm looking forward to it. It's not good. If
I remember correctly, it's not good. No.
I know it has its defenders, and I know Neville and Taylor are certainly, they at least have more of an artistic mark than Mark Steven Johnson.
Yeah, the thing is, I love it, but they're the thing about Neville Dean Taylor, and I just did Crank and Mank month.
Yes.
Over at the Happy Place, which was astonishingly unsuccessful for some reason. People thought that was a dumb idea they didn't care for. But what I did was I watched pretty much all of Neville Dean Taylor's movies, with the exception of this, and Jonah Hex, another wildly misguided superhero botch. And with the exception of their horror movie, like Crank and Crank 2 are friggin' masterpieces. Like, I could watch them over and over and over again. They're real auteurs. But other than the horror movie they did, which also is very, very dark and very twisted and very cranky, has just been a phenomenal disappointment. Yeah. And I feel like this is kind of a similar thing where you have, and again, like, it's not completely worthless because Nicolas Cage is fun. Yeah. And I feel like part of the problems with the sequel was they made it grimmer. And that cut out some of the joy and the fun. And again, I feel like one of the things that makes Nicolas Cage so delightful is that there's a real Boy Scout in him. And this is interesting because he's kind of the Boy Scout who becomes, the devil's minion. And he's
really do try for a Jekyll Hyde thing with this, don't they?
Yeah. So yeah, I really enjoyed Nicolas Cage's performance, but this movie disappointed the hell out of me. And again, I feel like, sort of people have a lot of problems with Marvel and the Marvelizations of pop culture, the Marvelizations of superhero movies and comic book movies. But you watch something like this, where nobody cares, and it's evident in it. Other than Nicolas Cage, it's evident in every shot. Yeah. And it's like, I'd rather have something that's formulaic than nobody cared.
Yeah.
If you were to make a movie about the making of this, I mean, nobody cared.
Right.
The Ghost Rider saga.
The greatest strengths and weaknesses of the MCU in its current form is that they've achieved a baseline competence that both make them feel like some of the best superhero movies of all time, considering the history of superhero movies, and also like because that consistency is so level, it is kind of uninspiring after a while. It's like eating the same thing over and over again. It starts to lose its sense of taste, or you just have COVID. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. And that's, I mean, God, I just did a blog post about people's hatred of critics and anti-critic. I think kind of inspired by a certain film that came out late last year that had very, very divided critics and people very angry. And I was thinking, like, one of the weird, virulent strains of anti-critic sentiment is this delusional belief on behalf of DC fans that the reason that Marvel is successful is because they literally pay critics to give them good reviews. And I was thinking that just unpacking the logic behind that assumes that the reason that Marvel movies are successful is because they get good reviews and not because they all literally cost $200 million to make and market, and they're all part of an incredibly successful, incredibly ubiquitous multimedia entertainment juggernaut. It's not that, I don't know, that Clint said that Black Panther was good, and that's the only reason why it did well. Crazily. So yeah, there's just, I feel like people hate critics so much and for so many weird reasons that at a certain point, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, there's a sense of elitism they accuse us of, which is hilarious considering we're all just people who like don't get paid.
Yeah.
I wish Marvel would send me a check.
Marvel, and again, like, are Marvel snobs? Are they elitists? You know, they're like, oh, you go from, it's not like, the Simpsons writer room where everybody is like a Harvard Lampoon alum. It's just very strange, this whole conception of like, oh, Marvel is the choice of the hoity-toity folks, but that's only because critics are getting paid off to say nice things about Captain Marvel.
Also, that presumes that regular people read reviews, which, as a film critic, I can tell you, they don't. We're essentially an industry where we're writing reviews for other film critics. Like, that's kind of the way it ends up being. And you find folks who read It's Happy Place and The Spool and listen to this fine podcast, of course. You are 100% one of the good ones. All right, well, let's leave Ghost Rider behind before we get too much into the sequel, which I am kind of excited to check out when we get to it, and move on to Bolt. Now, I'll take Bolt since
go for it.
So Bolt was sort of the first big hit for Walt Disney Animation Studios, which we know for a bunch of other stuff. It's basically all the big non-Pixar stuff that Disney puts out. But this was like the first real thing, sort of one of their first. It was part of the Disney revival of animation that sort of came after the Disney Renaissance came and went in the 90s. And then Pixar was part of it, but now Walt Disney has their own in-house thing, and they have...
Well, and I think also John Lasseter is executive producer. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was around the time when Pixar was kind of starting to run Disney animation.
Yeah, probably. So it is a very Pixar-inflected kind of journey, right? I mean, it's very much like, what if The Incredibles was a dog a little bit, and they didn't actually have powers? And so...
Wait, what? I was not paying attention. Oh my God.
I know, right? So a Bolt follows obviously the titular dog, who is adopted by an adorable 8-year-old named Penny, and 5 years later, they seem to have been recruited as sort of superheroes because Penny's father is a scientist and outfits Bolt with all these incredible superpowers. And we see this beautiful, this dazzling chase sequence that, in classic movie fashion, suddenly you hear the word "cut," and it turns out to have been a movie set the whole time, which I will leave behind the logistics. Television, right?
Yeah. Yes. I initially thought that this was like a Movie World satire, and they're very similar. I mean, the same kind of.
It's a pretty big budget TV series. Let's be real.
Yeah, I think it is like it'd be like a Jerry Bruckheimer television series. It's like CSI or something where you got $8 million and you can afford Ted Danson for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. But I always love in movies when they do that, when they like set up the situation, then reveal it's like a movie or a TV show set. The sequence that we've seen has to have been real. Because it's all a wonder, and it happened all the time. There's like they cleared a highway.
A lot of CGI as well.
Yeah, but essentially, long story short, Penny in the interim has become a star child actor along with her pet dog, who plays a super dog also named Bolt. The twist is the trainers have trained Bolt to think that this is all real and that he really has superpowers. Because I guess method acting for dogs, he has to believe that it is real or the magic is gone.
I really enjoyed this film, but you pointed out a plot hole, and now I hate it. Now I want to literally set every copy of it on fire.
We are now cinema sins. And so essentially what happens is...
Also, dogs can't talk. Very unoriginal, very unrealistic.
How dare. But that sort of that dedication to realism bites them in the ass when Penny is stolen in a cliffhanger episode that Bolt believes. So Bolt believes like the real villains have taken his real person away, and he gets knocked out in a trailer and he ends up like getting driven cross country. So now it's the classic sort of kids movie road trip thing where he has to get back to his person, and he ends up befriending this stray cat named Mittens, played by Susie Essman from Curb Your Enthusiasm. That's another thing I love about these movies. They give people who like wouldn't normally be these kinds of leads. Like you can voice a cartoon animal and be like the most character actor.
Like Sarah Silverman, she was the star of Wreck-It Ralph, and John C. Reilly. And that's wonderful because, they have great voices and great person. And again, I feel like one of the things that really works about this is a lot of times when you have like, let's bring in a bunch of ringers. Yeah. You can obviously see that like, oh, this script is bad. Let's just try and make up some nonsense. That's better than this garbage thing put before us. And I felt like this was an instance where they hired a lot of ringers to make a good script even better. Yeah, and like Susie Essman is really funny, and like some of the inside showbiz riffs were really, really funny and really, really inspiring. Like stock characters, like they have an agent who's voiced by Greg German. Yeah, he's very, very funny. A real scene stealer. And he has like where he's trying to manipulate the little girl, and he's like, oh yeah, like things when I was a kid, I didn't get what I wanted. For example, I wanted a bike, but instead I got a baseball glove, so I rode it to school every single day. And just the visual image of somebody riding a baseball glove to work every day. Just the cynicism of like, these people are just terrible to children and terrible to dogs. That's very true to life. That showbiz is just kind of awful. And it kind of, it takes literally the sweetest creatures in the world like Bolt and just play weird mind games with them. Yeah.
And Travolta plays Bolt extremely straight, which I think is to the film's favor. Like, we talk about Cage being a Boy Scout and a lot of his stuff, but this is like John Travolta playing like the purest Boy Scout of Boy Scouts. And I think this is a really good, this is a really good sort of outlet for that kind of gee whiz. There's no edge to Bolt, and that's kind of the point, because he's this gormless innocent who has been fed a lie his whole life, and this road trip getting back to his person and sort of clashing against the more cynical Mittens is a really interesting kind of back and forth, which is really nice. And again, unlike the Ant Bully, the animation is still great. Like, I think
and you sort of talked about the first scene, and I feel like one of the things that you can do with CGI and computer animation is you can make things zoom very, very satisfyingly. You can have a bunch. It's great for chases. It's great for people running. It's great for all of these things. And I feel like they really play to the strengths. And there's the fish out of water quality of this person who's like lived their whole life a lie, basically, sort of encountering the real world for the first time. There's something very, very inspired about that. Also, like kind of on a meta level, I feel like this is kind of an interesting meditation on John Travolta's Scientology. Because here he is, like this very sweet, very nice, pure soul who believes something ridiculous. And who has devoted their entire life to this bizarre fiction that posits them as heroic and wonderful and capable of changing the world, and kind of realizing over the course of like, wait, that's not how the world works. And and there's also a bit of a Truman Show element to it. This idea of, to go from the world of entertainment and the world of fiction and the world of make-believe to like this funky real world.
And of course there's the Toy Story element too. Like the thematic, the subtext is very much almost one-to-one, where we are following this inexplicably speaking, best friend to children, and sort of seeing their relationship to their master, their human, sort of the godlike reverence with which this endless unconditional love, and seeing what happens when they are separated from that and having to redefine themselves in the face of that idea of like, who am I without this person? Who am I without what the sort of presumptions? He's sort of having a Buzz Lightyear moment. This is a Buzz Lightyear thing, where he's realizing he's non-vulnerable.
Right, in the third act of Bolt, the cartoon Bolt, Bolt has an existential crisis.
Yes, exactly.
And Bolt wonders who he is and what his life means and what the meaning of life is. And again, it's played very effectively. I also feel like this is, I'm not surprised that this did well, because it combines three things that kids love, which is adorable dogs, superheroes, and show business satire.
Indeed.
They want to see jokes about pitching. They want to see jokes about agents. They want to see jokes about studios and networks being cowardly. But I feel like this is one of those things where you have the anthropomorphic animal adventure for children, and kind of the fish out of water showbiz comedy for adults, and they fit together. And one doesn't defeat the other. They kind of there's something for kids and there's something for adults. If you're from the proverbial 3 to 99,
I know personally my favorite film as a kid was Albert Brooks's The Muse. So I think you got something there about kids just loving showbiz.
I was more of a modern romance man myself personally.
A little bit of The Player,
right. But again, they got a lot of Nick Swardson. Is a lot of fun as a pigeon who is also trying to become a writer. There's a character named Rhino who is a guinea pig or a hamster who worships Bolt, and they have a really fun dynamic where he's the only person who believes in Bolt as much as Bolt believes in himself. And it's I feel like there are a lot of sort of your Zootopias, and Your Secret Lives of Pets. I feel like there's a whole sort of strain of animated films of let's explore the funky humanity of animal. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is one of those cases where it's done really well.
Yeah. I mean, I just, it was very surprising how much it both hewed to formula and just executed on that formula really nicely. Like even the middle act, which is normally sort of the weakest part of these things, where they're fully out of their element and sort of having to struggle. I love that mid-film montage where he's just sort of learning, Mittens is sort of teaching him how to be a real dog. That stuff is really, really cute, learning how to fetch and just because he's had such a different experience. He's learning vulnerability for the first time ever. And at first he's suspicious of it, and then he has to grow to get used to it. And again, like you said, the back and forth between Bolt and Mittens and Rhino specifically, those are two, it's a really great screenwriting tactic where you put your main character in a predicament and then you surround him with two characters that are at opposite poles of that. There's Rhino, who believes that he's a superhero. There's Mittens, who knows he isn't. And seeing the back and forth between that is just they executed on it really nicely, and it's a tight 96. Thank God. I wish Ghost Rider was 90 minutes.
Well, and again, they're just there's tiny little details that I really liked, like the pigeon characters.
The way they animate the pigeons too.
I just like their eyes in particular, where they're always looking in a bunch of different directions at the same time, and it's weirdly hypnotic. And sort of the attitudes that the animals had towards Bolt was kind of interesting, and that some of them are just kind of messing with them. Look at this half-wit who believes this bizarre fiction, who thinks that this role that he plays is real. And there's just some greats so I guess some pigeons are where do I know that animal from? Where do I know him from? And while they're saying that, literally a bunch of buses with his face and his name on the side of it. That was a very, very clever kind of sort of running gag.
I love it. There's a lot of great visual gags in this. And I mean, and like you said, Nick Swardson's really fun. I happen to be rewatching Reno 911. And which he's one of the recurring.
I made the mistake of watching one of the new ones. Oh boy! I think I read your review in either The Spool or in Consequence. And I said, "Oh boy, this sounds kind of dicey." And then I watched it. I'm like, "Oh boy, this is not a good idea. This is not the right time for that. The world does not need a wacky improvised cop show." There's a reason why Brooklyn 919 is winding down.
I mean, it's tough because I wrote that piece over at Consequence just about, it was even a few months before George Floyd too, where I was like, is this a good idea? Because they know that cops are bad, and that's the joke. But it's still it's one thing to know that and one thing to do it. And also it was a Quibi thing at the time. That's what they brought it back on Quibi. And there's still some great gags there. But I remember writing that what I felt was a pretty even-handed mixed thing. And then Robert Ben Garant commented on it.
Oh God. And again, I really, really like Thomas Lennon, but the whole the pronouns thing, I don't want to overuse a phrase, but I was cringe. I was you're such a talented guy, you're such a smart guy. guy and you seem like a really good dude.
Yeah.
And this is just really landing very, very wrong.
Ironically enough, like the edge works better in the original run of the show before this all the stuff they felt they were pushing up against was happening. It's just, I don't know. I miss that era, and I wish it was better. I mean,
that's like too. It's like I really enjoyed this, but I'm like, I'm not going to move to write like
it's
1,700 words. It's like, it's cute, it's clever.
Yeah,
it works.
When a movie gets this much of the basics right, it's kind of tough to like be more specific. It just works.
Oh, totally. And this is the thing about Ghost Rider is part of it works spectacularly well, and the rest of it just does not work at all. It's very clear cut what is good about it, what's bad about it. Where this is just everything is pretty clever, pretty inspired. Again, it hits the right. I was thinking it's kind of sad that, probably this is John Travolta's third best role of the last 20 years or so. Yeah. And it's as the voice of a dog. Who is deluded into thinking that he's an actual superhero.
Because I was just thinking, watching both of these, I'm like, is this the last time we're probably going to give John Travolta the cage match?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to do the People versus O.J. Simpson at some point, and that's interesting. And I would like Cuba Gooding Jr. as O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
Oh God,
it's gonna be wild. I mean, honestly, for the sake of this project, thank God they don't do more TV. Imagine how much more.
Yeah, for sure. Although they're going to be doing Joe Exotic.
Yes,
and that's good. And I thought that was going to come out this year, and that'll be interesting because Cage has had such a comeback.
Yeah,
and there's a pretty good chance that he will be an Oscar nominee when Joe Tiger King. Joe Exotic, Tiger King. That'll be really fascinating to see how that plays. And because he has such a persona, and such a sensibility, and then to see how that meshes with that of Joe Exotic, the most embarrassing and tacky and weirdly riveting person in the world.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. It's at once like horrible stunt casting and also the kind of thing that he could very well pull off. So I'm very interested. But also I feel like we as a society have moved on from Joe Exotic, like to the point that we had a second season of Tiger King and like we didn't even care enough.
Shrug. It's like I feel like there are certain things you just associate with the very beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I feel like, the Tiger King is definitely what they were now. Like, even now, it's like, it seems like that happened a million years ago and not a year and a half ago.
And yet we're getting a Sonic the Hedgehog too.
Very exciting.
Will wonders ever cease. All right. Well, I mean, unless we have anything else to say about
with sexy Ilda.
Or we didn't do a deep dive on Bolt. Oh, John Powell did the score. I love John Powell. Like, it's a really solid, effective. Like, he does these animated movies really, really well. Other than that, again, it's just a solid movie. There's not really much else to say.
And I appreciate that there wasn't like a sequel or a prequel, or like a Netflix series. They knew when they knew to get out while they were ahead.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's move on to Cage Match. Probably another intensely predictable one. Which one's better, Nathan? Ghost Rider or Bolt?
Well, I very much enjoyed Nicolas Cage's performance as Johnny Blaze in Ghost Rider, but Bolt is the clearly superior motion picture where, that's just probably one of the last just straight out winners. In John Travolta's filmography. And we've got Hairspray, which I haven't seen in a while, but I have very fond memories of that as well. Although, his performance was not my favorite part of that, but it'll be very interesting to see that within the context of this project, and particularly in the context of Wild Hogs, which is nothing but gay panic jokes and grossness and toxic masculinity.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what's going on. And Bolt is just, it's too competent a motion picture for me to override it in favor of Nick Cage just doing the most in an exceedingly mediocre superhero.
Oh, yeah. And also you can watch Bolt on Disney Plus, and you don't have to pay that close of attention. you can address envelopes without missing anything too important. It's kind of a hangover movie, just kind of watch it in the background.
You sound like you speak from experience.
Yeah. Well, I may or may not. Got a lot of things to do. I got to multitask these days.
The hectic pace of modern life. I'm telling you,
for sure. All
right. Well, congratulations, Bolt. Disney, you won another one again. As opposed to this is before Marvel was owned by Disney too. So this could have been two Disney movies competing against each other. Thank God they weren't. But that's pretty much it for this episode of Effin Birds Presents Travolta Cage. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever your podcast platform may be. Our show is edited by Chris Barrett, and I'm blanking on the stuff. Oh yeah, you can subscribe to our podcast. You can subscribe to our. No, I already did the subscribe part. Man, it has been a day. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Travolta Cage, me on Twitter at Clint Worthing, Nathan on Twitter at Nathan Rabin. You can go to nathanrabin.com for write-ups on the episodes and the actual essays on each individual movie.
Although I will say that our Twitter account has been cursed by the devil. No matter how clever I try and make it, we never have more than 480 followers.
Yes.
So follow us. It's really clever. I put my heart and soul into it. And it would be great to get up to 500, if nothing else.
We are posting through it. Let's just you can support us on Patreon by going to patreon.com/TravoltaCage. Thanks so much for listening. And now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta poo.